Hello, and welcome to the 7th episode of Level Up with Lev. I am your host, Lev, and this is a show where I share stories and concepts and things that I've learned along my journey in order to improve in one way or another. So in today's episode, I will be discussing the concept of growth, and 4 specific subcomponents that I'll be talking about today include learning, change, balance, and seasons. So when it comes to these 4 subcomponents, 2 of them, the first 2, namely learning and change, include skills that we can work on and develop that can facilitate our growth, whereas the other 2, balance and seasons, are kind of themes that I keep in the back of my mind whenever I'm going through a season of growth or when I'm thinking about entering a period where I'm trying to develop a skill or trying to improve myself in one way or another. So I hope that gives enough background, and with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Learning. So I view learning as a skill, and just like any other skill, as long as we know what's required in order to develop and improve, we can get better at it. It just takes practice. And so today, the way that I want to talk about learning is specifically in the sense of receptivity, being receptive. Being open to receiving new information is a skill. And there are many notable quotes when it comes to the importance of learning new skills and new information. For example, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Perhaps you've even heard that the pen is mightier than the sword, or simply, knowledge is power. So all of these timeless quotes relay the importance of obtaining and learning new information. And once we obtain that new information, we're able to use it to our advantage in whatever ways that we can conceptualize. And so I think it's incredibly important to understand how crucial it is when it comes to growth and change, the importance of information itself. Information can be viewed as metaphorical gold, which can quite literally turn into physical gold in the form of currency if it's used in a manner that will lead to such. Or if you think about it, the gold in the form of improving yourself. So in specific relation to improving oneself, if you aren't where you want to be, there's a high likelihood that you don't know what you need to know in order to get to where you want to go. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you want to improve in any aspect in your life, start by learning what you need to do in order to improve. It really is that simple in the beginning. I found that in the past, I caught myself thinking, I'm not really good at doing X, Y, or Z. Oh well. And it wasn't until I started my journey of personal growth and personal development that I realized how limiting these beliefs were, these thoughts that came into my head in terms of the progression in my life. And this was initially largely due to a lack of knowing how to even start improving at X, Y, or Z. And it's literally as simple as starting with a quick Google search or a YouTube how-to video. Typing in your question into those platforms will yield someone who's explained this, someone who's gone through it before, perhaps even picking up a good book on the subject, or talking to friends, professionals, etc. By doing these very simple first steps, I learned what was necessary to just start. And once you get started with something, it's much easier to feel what it's actually like and continue forward, refining your ability as you go. And if you think about the inversion of this principle, if you already know what's required in order to grow and improve, what's stopping you? And so it took this great shift in my head to really realize that if I wanted to improve in any way, I could start. I could just Google it, or I could YouTube it, or I could get a good book on the topic, or I could talk to a professional. I could just look it up, check out different resources, and figure out, okay, this method worked for me, this method didn't work, or this is how I can improve in this way, or I could probably use some help in this regard. So I need to look up more resources. So all of that to say, I don't know how is just not a valid excuse anymore. The world is at our fingertips, and the great minds of the past who struggled to provide us with such a great wealth of information would probably be rolling over in their graves right now. Now, this is quite an empowering view on self-improvement and growth in general because it places the onus back in the hands of the individual. And again, as I've mentioned in the previous episode, I believe that all change has to come from within. So if you have this power in your hands to learn what is required to improve and to grow and to go out and do it, then go do it. It's in your hands. And I think that that's such an empowering message. And I love to keep that in the back of my head when I think about growing in one way or another. Change. Now, change can be uncomfortable, and partially because it's destabilizing in a fundamental sense. We're creatures of pattern. We like stability, and change involves stepping away from our normal modes of being, what's familiar, so the way that we typically operate in the world and what's in our nearby environment, in order to reach new levels. And note here that I think that, as I'll mention in the next section, balance is important. I'm not recommending to change everything in your life all at once. I certainly did not do that. And I'm not recommending starting something new every week. So I give myself some space and some grace when it comes to being hesitant or reluctant to change in different ways. But if we are wanting to grow and to improve, we have to understand that growth involves change in some regard. Otherwise, we just stay the same and nothing would improve. So this also makes it quite understandable if we don't keep up with our New Year's resolutions, for example, or if we stay in unhealthy relationships, or we don't give up our vices. What's familiar is comfortable. It's routine. It's what we're used to. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't, if you will. However, just because it's understandable doesn't make it okay, because again, it holds us back from improving and growing if we're hesitant to do new things or to change up the way that we currently operate in order to become a better version of ourselves. And this is something that was challenging for me to really understand and internalize, but once I did, I became more familiar and more comfortable with the concept of change itself. So I view the process of being comfortable with the idea of change as a skill that I needed to learn in order to become a better version of myself. And also understanding that there is a balance that needs to be struck between changing too much at once or not changing at all. There's a fine middle ground, and once I became more familiar with the concept and the idea of change, I was able to, through intentional practice, find that middle ground that allowed me to both operate from a stable baseline but also change enough at once in order to improve. And that skill of finding the middle ground comes with first learning what's required, setting a plan, and then dipping my toes in, doing a little bit at a time, not too much at once, because that might lead to me burning out or getting overwhelmed, but doing just enough that I can be consistent in whatever I'm doing in a way that over time, I'll see the results that I'd like to see. Balance. So I think that this provides a smooth transition into the concept of balance, as I've already alluded to in the previous section. And we can conceptualize balance in a number of different ways. So as I mentioned in the previous section, this might involve balancing what we change, how much we change at a time, keeping in mind that change itself can be destabilizing, especially if we change too much at once. And if we're not stable in our lives, then changing too much at once could lead us to not function as smoothly as we could and actually see out the process of change and development to yield the results that we'd like to see. So I want to introduce the idea of having a stable baseline foundation. And essentially this involves having our feet or our lives firmly planted on the ground so that we can tweak one thing at a time, whether that means working on a new skill or trying to identify limiting thoughts in our head, learning more about a new subject, that way we could be more competitive in the job market, things of that nature. So bear with me while I walk through a quick analogy. So imagine you have to go to the grocery store and you have to pick up about 5 or 6 bags of groceries in order to sustain you for the next 2 weeks. Now I want you to think about these grocery bags as a new skill or something you're trying to work on and improve. Now imagine you have 3 choices of different vehicles. You have a 4-door sedan, a motorcycle, and a unicycle. Now think about balancing in each of those 3 different vehicles as the foundation upon which you operate. Which of those vehicles do you think it would be easier to balance in? Of course, it would be the 4-door sedan. You don't even have to think about balancing when you're carrying all those different grocery bags. Whereas if you're on a motorcycle or a unicycle, it's much harder to balance while you're doing these new things, taking your groceries back to your house. So having a stable baseline foundation makes it much easier for us to achieve our goals in life because it minimizes the amount that we have to think about or balance and manage other aspects of our lives that would reduce the amount of effort and mental energy that we're able to allot to learning that new skill or improving in that manner. And there's also a discussion to be had about how much we work and how hard we work in terms of balance. A general note is to find your balance so that you're able to operate smoothly in all of the normal aspects of your life in order to avoid burning out when it comes to doing something new, because this can and will stunt your overall growth and improvement. I had to spend a number of years trying to figure out what a proper balance looked like for me between work, spending social time with family and friends, engaging in hobbies and having downtime, working on side projects, and learning new skills. But I started with the basics and building a really solid and stable foundation and building up from there. I also had to figure out what that balance looked like during different times of my life. There were times in my life where I had to spend more time in certain categories versus the others, and I'll talk about that more when we get to our discussion around seasons. And a final note is that balance is relative to the individual. Some people love to work and spend their time reading or learning or working on new skills. Other people don't like to work. Certain people are more creative individuals, and some people love spending their downtime recreationally, with friends. Everyone is different, and this is a crucial aspect to understand when it comes to understanding yourself and self-development and self-improvement in general. I gained so much when I learned to listen to myself and follow my own nature when it comes to finding this balance between all of those different categories that are a part of life. And the next mini season will discuss how I came to understand myself. But for now, I'll just mention that learning to find my own balance rather than what others insisted what my balance should look like was incredibly helpful for me. There is value in the opinions of others and society. I'm not saying that there isn't. I just learned how incredibly crucial it was for me in order to grow in my life when I started to listen to myself and follow my nature and really find what the proper balance was for me. And so to explain what this balance might look like in different times of my life, we'll move on to the final concept for today, titled seasons. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying today's episode. I just wanted to include a brief intermission to let you know a couple things. So first, we're getting close to the end of this first mini season, which means that I'll be taking a break of about 2 to 3 weeks just so I can organize the content for next season. Also, at the end of this mini season, I want to do a Q&A episode where I answer questions that have come in from the audience, which is you. So please send any questions you might have about anything that I've discussed in this show or something that I haven't discussed thus far. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to engage with any questions you might have. So please reach out. All right, let's get back to the episode. Seasons. So we can think about seasons in a number of different ways, but for this show, in this episode, I'm going to focus on one specific way, which is looking at seasons of growth versus otherwise. So I want to reiterate that a lot of the material in this show is relative to the individual, and that's just the same when it comes to seasons. The individual decides when they're in a season of growth or otherwise. And during seasons of growth, I find that I adjust the amount of time that I spend in different categories in order to achieve my goals of the time. And also, I want to note that we're not always in seasons of growth, and that's inherent in the term seasons. Some refer to being in one of these seasons as being on the grind, or it's grind season. Noteworthy seasons of growth include perhaps college, or when you're learning a new skill, attempting to get a new job, working on a project, or any large changes in your life circumstances, like moving. And during these seasons of growth or hard work, I reduce the amount of time that's spent in social or recreational activities, again, temporarily, and I increase the time that I spend studying or working or developing that new skill or getting my life back on track and finding a stable baseline foundation. And as I discussed in the previous episode regarding 4 simple components of self-transformation, specifically the conversation regarding sacrifice, sometimes I benefit from attaching metaphors of different stages to my life at the time. So for example, during these seasons of growth, I might refer to it in my head as being in a chamber of reflection, which is a great song by Mac DeMarco, or being in a hyperbolic time chamber, Dragon Ball Z, phenomenal show, or even entering a chrysalis, which is a cocoon, after which I'll emerge on the other side in a better state or a better form, an improved form of myself. So in all of the above instances, there are a couple things to note. First is that they all refer to times where I'm a little less available to the outside world, and sometimes that's what's required in order to grow and to improve in different areas of your life. The second point is that these times are specifically dedicated to growth, so I'm not merely attempting to isolate myself from the outside world for no reason, or due to unhealthy behavioral patterns. And so a special note is that during these periods, I do remain in contact with my family and close friends, and I highly recommend that everybody else do the same. And the final note is that the metaphorical relation sounds cool to me. It feels cool, which helps me get through those tough times because it does involve a lot of work, or a lot of dedication or persistence. So again, whatever works for you. And if you want another metaphorical way to think about the concept of seasons when it comes to personal growth and development, I highly recommend checking out a talk by Jim Rohn, who is a successful entrepreneur, author, and motivational speaker. I'll include a link to that above. Wait, I think it's on this side. Yeah, I messed up last time. I put it over here. I'll put a link above up here. So let's wrap this all up. In summary, first, I identify as a perpetual student. I know that there is so much information that is out there that is available at my fingertips. And if there's any way in which I want to improve or to grow, I need only seek out those resources. In order to improve your knowledge or skill set in any regard, you have to start from level 0. And then you level up with Lev. And of course, there's a necessary next step of utilizing what you learned in order to actually improve. There's also a note to learn how you learn best. And we'll discuss that in the next mini season when I discuss understanding myself. And I also keep in mind that growth involves change, and change can be intimidating. We are creatures of habit and we like consistency. and sometimes change can be destabilizing. However, if we're to improve, we have to overcome our resistance to change so that we can do what is required in order to improve. And since change can be destabilizing if done too much at once, perhaps, it's important to keep balance in the back of our heads. We need to operate from a stable baseline foundation and change bits and pieces at a time, not too much so that we become overwhelmed or that we lose our footing. Operating from a stable baseline foundation makes the steps that we need to take towards improving that much easier because they're facilitated. There are less moving pieces that we have to worry about, and our mental capacities, our physical capacities are freed up in some sense. A final note on balance is that it took me a while to find my specific balance, what it looks like to work too much versus not enough, spending time with family and friends, spending time socially and recreationally, working, learning new skills, and understanding that during different times in my life, that balance might look a little different. So that brings me to the final point of seasons. At different times in my life, I might be in a season of growth or otherwise. And during those seasons of growth, I might spend a little less time socializing or doing recreational activities and a bit more time working or studying or developing that new skill. But I still maintain that stable baseline foundation, and I do keep in contact with close friends and loved ones. The grind isn't forever, and there are times for us to reap the fruit of the seeds of our efforts. And that brings us to the end of the 7th episode of Level Up with Lev. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And as I mentioned halfway through this episode, we're getting close to the end of this first mini season. So please send in questions for the Q&A episode that I'd love to do at the end of this mini season. And again, feel free to reach out to me on any social media channels at Level Up with Lev or some slight variant. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback. Comment down below if you like this episode, like it. If you're listening to it on a streaming platform, then perhaps give this show a rating. I'd appreciate anything you can offer me, and I hope that I'm offering you something of value. With that said, thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Hope your week goes well, and I'll talk to you next week.